At first, it felt like a fairy tale. I was 23, newly married to Ben, and we were starting our life together in a cozy apartment on the edge of the city. We were so in love, or at least I thought we were. He was my rock, always there for me when I needed him, supporting me through school and the early days of my career. I couldn't imagine life without him. But after we got married, things began to shift. We moved into a bigger house, one that we could afford now that Ben's career had really taken off. It was supposed to be the beginning of our perfect future: more space, more comfort, more freedom. We had the house, the car, the nice furniture. People envied us. But something about the house felt wrong from the start. It wasn't that it was too big or too fancy, it was the emptiness that seemed to echo through every room. I had always been the type to find comfort in small, intimate spaces, but this house felt like it was designed for someone else's life. We started to drift without realizing it. Ben was working longer hours at the office, staying late for meetings, traveling more frequently for business. At first, I didn't mind. I respected his drive, admired his ambition. But as the weeks passed, I started feeling a strange sense of loneliness. It wasn't like he was gone all the time, but when he was home, he wasn't really there. He'd sit in front of the TV, lost in his phone or his emails, barely noticing I was in the same room. And when he did look at me, it was as if he was seeing a stranger. I felt invisible, like I was just another thing in the house, just another piece of furniture. I tried to fill the silence with other things: my job, my friends, even shopping. I told myself that it was fine, that this was just a phase. Ben was busy, and I was just adjusting to a new routine. But the more I tried to keep myself busy, the more I realized how isolated I had become. There were days when I wouldn't even speak to him until we sat down for dinner, and even then, the conversations felt forced, like we were playing a role rather than living a life together. It wasn't just the silence that bothered me, it was the way Ben had changed. He was still kind and polite, but there was a distance between us, a wall I couldn't seem to climb over. I missed the man I had married, the one who used to be so full of life and laughter. Now, he was always tired, always distracted. I would try to talk to him about how I was feeling, about how alone I felt, but the conversation would always end the same way, with him brushing it off or turning it into something about him. He'd say things like, "You know, I have to work hard for us," or, "I'm doing this for our future." But I wasn't asking for more things. I was asking for him. We had everything, and yet I felt like I was losing him. The more I tried to communicate, the more I realized that I wasn't speaking the same language as him. I wanted emotional connection, he wanted financial security. I wanted intimacy, he wanted success. We were on different paths, and I couldn't find a way to meet him in the middle. It was subtle at first, but over time, I became resentful. I began to resent the long hours he spent at work, the way he prioritized everything else over me. I resented the empty house that felt like a monument to our failing marriage. I resented the way he would come home, give me a quick kiss on the cheek, and then retreat into his world. I couldn't help but wonder if it was all worth it. Was this the life I had imagined? Was this what I had signed up for when I said, "I do"? At some point, I stopped trying to fix things. I stopped initiating conversations, stopped reaching out for affection. I started to withdraw too, filling my days with distractions, anything to avoid facing the growing void between us. I didn't know what to do. I was scared of being alone, but I was more scared of being alone with him. And that scared me even more. Because in a marriage, when you feel like you're alone with someone, that's when you know something is wrong. That's when you realize that the person you thought you knew isn't the same anymore. Neither of us was the same, and neither of us knew how to go back to what we once had. But I didn't say anything. I didn't confront him. I didn't fight for us. Instead, I just let it happen, quietly, painfully, and without any idea of how to stop it. It all started at a dinner party with friends, one of those nights that seemed like it would be full of laughter and light-hearted conversation. Ben and I had been invited by our mutual friends, Sarah and Mike, to celebrate Sarah's new promotion at work. The house was buzzing with chatter, everyone in a good mood, glasses clinking, food being passed around. I remember thinking that it was the first time in weeks that we had a moment to relax, to just enjoy each other's company without the weight of work or our empty house hanging over us. The evening was going smoothly, and I was feeling more comfortable than I had in a long time. I laughed and joked with the others, trying to push the loneliness I had been feeling away, if only for a few hours. Ben had been unusually quiet that night, but I didn't think much of it at first. He'd been like that a lot recently, distant, distracted. I thought maybe he was just tired, but I tried not to let it ruin the mood. At one point during the meal, the conversation shifted to work, as it often does at these kinds of gatherings. Everyone was talking about their jobs, their projects, the things they were looking forward to in the coming months. Ben, who had been somewhat disengaged up until then, suddenly jumped in with a comment about how he couldn't decide between two big opportunities at work. He was tossing and turning at night, unable to pick the right path. It seemed like a simple problem, one I had heard him mention a few times before. That's when I, trying to lighten the mood, made my joke. "You know, Ben, you're just one of many options," I said, laughing. "I mean, I've got my options too. We all do." It was supposed to be funny, just a playful comment meant to poke fun at his indecision. I didn't think it was anything serious, just a joke among friends. Everyone chuckled, Sarah and Mike laughed along, but I noticed that Ben went silent. His eyes, which had been warm moments before, suddenly turned cold. There was no smile, no response. Just a sharp, almost indiscernible shift in his expression. It didn't hit me at first, I thought maybe he didn't get it. But as the night went on, I could feel the change. Something was off, and I couldn't figure out what. After the party, we drove home in silence. The tension in the car was palpable, the air thick with words unspoken. I glanced over at Ben, hoping he would break the silence, but he didn't. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles were white. I tried to speak, to ask if everything was okay, but he cut me off before I could even get a word out. "Do you think I'm some sort of joke?" he snapped, his voice low and sharp. I was taken aback. I had no idea what he was talking about. "Ben, what are you talking about?" I asked, trying to make sense of what was happening. But he wouldn't look at me, wouldn't meet my gaze. "The way you made fun of me tonight," he muttered, his voice full of bitterness. "Do you really think I'm just one of your options?" I froze. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the car. My heart started to race, and I suddenly felt incredibly small. "Ben, I didn't mean it like that," I tried to explain, but the words felt weak, like they couldn't bridge the gap that was widening between us. "It was just a joke," I said, desperate to make him understand. But he wasn't listening. He was too far gone, lost in the hurt that my words had caused. And in that moment, I realized that I had crossed a line. A line I didn't even know existed. The rest of the drive was silent. I could feel the walls building between us, brick by brick. When we got home, Ben didn't even acknowledge me as he went to bed. He just turned away, leaving me standing in the doorway of our bedroom, stunned and helpless. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, wondering what had just happened. How had a simple joke, something so trivial, caused all of this? I had been joking, trying to lighten the mood, but now it felt like I had shattered something that I couldn't fix. The reality hit me like a ton of bricks. I had hurt him, deeply. And in return, I had lost him, even if just for the moment. I spent the next few days trying to figure out what went wrong, but every attempt to talk about it only seemed to push him further away. The distance between us grew, and I realized that I wasn't just fighting for him to forgive me, I was fighting to keep our marriage from unraveling completely. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't undo what had been said. And I couldn't stop the inevitable. Our relationship was breaking down, piece by piece, all because of one offhand remark, one joke that had gone horribly wrong. The days after the joke were unbearable. I had tried to apologize, over and over again, but Ben's response was always the same, silence. He would barely look at me, his eyes cold, distant. He had retreated into himself, and no matter what I said or did, it felt like I was talking to a wall. The emotional distance between us was growing wider with every passing moment, and it became painfully clear that he wasn't going to forgive me anytime soon. I tried to fill the silence with distractions. I threw myself into work, focusing on tasks that I had been putting off, thinking that if I kept myself busy enough, the pain would fade. But it didn't. Every time I came home, it was like walking into a stranger's house. The laughter we used to share, the little inside jokes, the warmth that used to radiate from him, gone. Replaced by a hollow space that I couldn't fill, no matter how hard I tried. I had started to notice little things. Ben would leave for work earlier than usual, and when he came home, he'd be exhausted, his mind seemingly elsewhere. He wasn't physically absent, he was still there, but emotionally, he had checked out. I would make dinner, set the table, but we'd eat in silence. He would nod absent-mindedly, maybe offer a one-word answer if I asked him about his day, but nothing more. The man who once used to be my partner in everything had become a stranger sitting across from me, trapped in a body I once knew so well. I couldn't understand why he was punishing me this way. I knew I had hurt him, but why couldn't he see how sorry I was? Why couldn't he understand that I hadn't meant to cause this much pain? Every time I tried to talk to him, he would shut down. He wasn't angry anymore, he was just numb. His indifference hurt more than any argument could have. I spent hours in my own thoughts, replaying everything that had happened, trying to find where things had gone wrong. I wondered if I had seen the signs earlier, the way he started working longer hours, the way his responses became shorter, the way we stopped talking about our future. I thought about the honeymoon phase we had shared, about how everything felt so perfect at the beginning. But now, I couldn't even remember the last time we had a real conversation, one that didn't feel forced or awkward. The worst part was that I could feel it slipping away, like sand through my fingers. I didn't want to accept it, but the reality was becoming clearer by the day. Ben wasn't the man I had married anymore. And worse, I didn't know if I could ever get him back. I wasn't just losing him emotionally, I was losing the very foundation of what had once been our relationship. I tried to make things right. I cooked his favorite meals, tried to surprise him with little gestures that had once brought a smile to his face. But each time, the effort felt futile. The smiles were gone, the warmth was gone, and the connection we once shared had vanished. It wasn't long before the realization hit me hard. We were both drowning in silence, and neither of us knew how to reach out. I was scared of what was happening, scared that the love I had fought so hard for was slipping away, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I had tried everything, but it wasn't enough. The gap between us was too wide, and the emotional exhaustion was too great. As much as I wanted to fix things, to undo the damage I had caused with one careless joke, I started to feel like I was fighting a losing battle. The more I tried, the more distant he became. And slowly, the idea of being married to someone who no longer seemed to care began to sink in. It was on a Friday evening when the breaking point finally arrived. After weeks of trying to bridge the gap between us, I had finally realized that nothing was going to change. The weight of the silence, the absence of affection, and the constant tension in the air had worn me down. Ben and I had spent another evening in that suffocating silence, sitting across from each other at the dinner table, both pretending that everything was fine when it was anything but. I had been holding on, hoping that the man I once knew would return. But with every passing day, I could feel myself slipping further away from him, unable to reach him. I had tried everything, apologies, conversations, gestures of love, but nothing seemed to get through to him. It was as if I was invisible to him now, a ghost of the woman I once was in his eyes. That evening, as we sat in the dimly lit living room, I finally snapped. The frustration had built up to a boiling point, and I couldn't hold it in any longer. I turned to him, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and sadness, and said, "What happened to us, Ben? Why are we like this? Why can't you see how much I've tried? Why won't you talk to me?" For the first time in weeks, Ben finally looked at me. His face was hard, like stone, but there was a flicker of something, maybe regret, maybe anger, that flashed in his eyes. He opened his mouth, and I braced myself for the words I had been dreading. But when he spoke, it wasn't what I expected. "I can't do this anymore," he said, his voice cold and final. "I can't pretend everything's okay. I've tried to be patient, but you don't get it. You've pushed me away with everything you've said and done. You think it's all just a joke, that we can laugh through it, but it's not. You've turned everything into a joke, and I can't live like this anymore." I felt the floor beneath me give way, my heart dropping into my stomach. The words stung, cutting deeper than anything I had ever imagined. "I didn't mean to hurt you," I whispered, my voice breaking. "It was just a joke. Just a stupid joke. I never meant for it to go this far." Ben shook his head, his expression unwavering. "It's not just the joke. It's everything, Emma. You've been so distant lately, so detached. We haven't been us for a long time. I'm tired of trying when I'm the only one who cares. I can't do this anymore." I felt the tears starting to well up, but I forced them back. I couldn't cry now. Not in front of him, not when everything was falling apart. "Are you saying you want to leave?" I asked, barely able to get the words out. I needed to know, needed him to say it out loud. Ben didn't respond immediately. He just stood there, looking at me, his face unreadable. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think it's over, Emma." Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. Over. It was over. Just like that. After everything we had been through, after everything I had hoped for, it all ended with those two simple words. I stood there, paralyzed, unable to process the enormity of it all. My mind was racing, but I couldn't find the words to stop him. I couldn't find anything to say that would change his mind. Ben gathered his things in silence, his movements mechanical. As he walked toward the door, I stood frozen, watching him go. He didn't look back. I wanted to call out, to beg him to stay, but the words wouldn't come. I had lost him, and there was nothing I could do to get him back. The door clicked shut behind him, and I was left standing in the empty house, my heart shattered. It was over. He was gone. And I was left with nothing but the echo of my own regret, a regret that would haunt me for a long time to come. The days after Ben left were the longest of my life. The house felt too quiet, too still. I couldn't escape the emptiness that weighed on me, and I spent most of my time trying to figure out where I had gone wrong. I replayed everything in my head, the joke, the silence, the final words we exchanged, and wondered if there was something I could have done differently. But as much as I searched for answers, I knew deep down that Ben and I had been on different paths for a long time. The hurt was deeper than just one moment, one careless joke. We had been falling apart for months, if not years. I threw myself into work, hoping to bury the pain, but nothing could numb the ache in my chest. I missed him, more than I cared to admit. But I also realized that, deep down, I missed the woman I used to be before everything went wrong. I was so consumed by the need to make things right with Ben that I had forgotten how to take care of myself. I had lost sight of who I was and what I wanted. And it was only after he left that I started to rediscover myself. A month passed, and I made progress, small, painful steps toward healing. I started going out with friends again, finding joy in the little things, like reading books, painting, and taking long walks in the park. It was hard at first, but with time, I began to feel a sense of peace returning to my life. I wasn't happy yet, but I was starting to find balance again. And through it all, I learned something important. I didn't need to rely on someone else to complete me. I could stand on my own, and that realization was both empowering and freeing. Then, one afternoon, as I was leaving work, I got a message from Ben. My heart skipped a beat as I stared at the screen. The message was short, just a few words, but it made my stomach turn with both hope and dread. "Can we talk?" I stared at it for what felt like hours, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to move on with my life, to let him go completely. But the other part, the part that still loved him, wanted to know if there was any chance for us. I took a deep breath and typed my response, "When and where?" We agreed to meet at a cafe near my apartment, the same place where we had gone on our first date. My hands trembled as I walked through the door, unsure of what I would find. Ben was sitting in the corner, looking more tired than I had ever seen him. He looked up when I entered, and for a brief moment, we just stared at each other, both unsure of where to begin. "I'm sorry," he said, breaking the silence. His voice was quieter than I remembered, filled with regret. "For everything. For not talking to you. For shutting you out." I felt my throat tighten as I swallowed back the emotions threatening to rise. "I'm sorry too," I whispered. "I shouldn't have said what I said. It wasn't a joke. It was a mistake." We sat in silence for a moment, each of us processing everything that had happened. Then, Ben reached across the table, his hand hesitating before resting on mine. "I don't know what the future holds," he said, his eyes softening. "But I know I don't want to lose you. Not like this." For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. I realized that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of our story. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to happen overnight, but we both knew that we had a chance to rebuild what we had lost. I squeezed his hand, the weight of everything we had been through settling between us. "I don't know what the future holds either," I replied. "But I think we owe it to ourselves to try." And with that, we both took the first step toward healing, not just as a couple, but as individuals who had learned the value of communication, forgiveness, and understanding. It wasn't the perfect resolution, but it was a resolution that felt right. And for the first time in a long while, I believed that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other.